This is the recap. It's time for the recap. We're making the recap. It's the recap show. It is the recap. I'm the guy who gives the recap. Where's the guy who gives the recap? Oh, he's right here. Oh, no, he's not. Oh, it's a map. It's a giant map. Let's turn it off. Hey. Hello, gamers of all stripes, colors, and persuasions. Welcome to the recap show. Welcome to Disorganized Play. I am your host of a rather monochromatic stripe and persuasion today. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm sorry that we did not get to do our normal get-together at 2 o'clock yesterday. However, you know, sometimes real life intercedes, as it has this week. So that's fine. Let's talk about the things that you missed. Yeah, you know what? Since I already gave you a preview, for those of you who look in our fancy map, I'm just going to blow away everything here. Boom. For those of you who have looked in our fancy maps folder, I did a new version of the Tar Wallows. So we will take a look at this as I'm talking through the recap of the session today. But I did a fancier version of it using some different size point markers and whatnot to give you a better idea of the detail and stuff. This is free for you. It is in our magical folder of goodies, our special Dropbox folder for Disorganized Play. I just updated the one that I had previously. So previously you had a scan of this black and white drawing. That was my original sketch for the Tar Wallows. And it was fine, hashtag fine. But as you have seen, this morning, one of the reasons I'm not a little more on top of things is this morning I did an updated version of this that looks like this. That I did on tracing paper with markers, and I scanned for you to use in your game as you see fit, whether you just want to use it as an encampment or a lair, or you actually want to follow along with the plot line as I have been unspooling it. So that's a little extra special treat for all of those of you who follow Disorganized Play. If you actually just... let me turn off my phone here for a moment so that we don't have interruptions. Yeah, perfect. Done. All right, great. So if you follow along, you can populate this exactly the way that I populated the scenario that I ran this past week. So our agenda for today... I pointed to it like the very first time. Normally I do this thing, but boom, I'm on top of it. I got it going on this morning. We are going to recap the session. We are going to talk about the challenges and tips that I would encounter upon running it a second time, or that I might give you if you were to run it yourself before you started in on this. We will take a brief look ahead at Chapter 3, and then I will do some Q&A with you guys. So we had some questions that came up last time. I'm trying to remember exactly what it was. We had something that came up after the chat ended, and I talked about it, but I talked about it in the chat, but I wanted to talk about it a little bit in the stream today. So hopefully either someone will jog my memory or it will come to me as we're discussing things today. It was something about... I'm going to have to think about it. I could go back and watch, and I'm sorry. No, I can't go back and watch because it was after the stream. I'm sorry. I ended the stream, and then I sat around and did text chat. This is all fascinating for all of you who just joined me, so I apologize for respooling this, but it's bugging me that I can't remember what the question was. At any rate, if you have questions, at me at Dungeon Bastard. You know, normally I do this, but I got it right the very first... I'm kidding. You can at me at Dungeon Bastard while we're here in the thing. You can pop something into the comments, but oftentimes the comments get ahead of Q&A, and then I will have to make a note and write it down, which I don't always do. All right, so something to be said for being a forgetful DM which I am absolutely 100% like confess to being an absent-minded DM. I don't know, what was that guy's name? I never write down the NPC's name. I make up a name on the spot, and then I never write it down, and the players are like, I think it was Sherman, or Sherwin, or Shurin, or something. You know, I always try and give it a good fantasy name. Problem with a good fantasy name is it's probably not memorable. So, that's the buzz. That's our agenda for today. I'm happy to take your questions. I don't have to end right at noon, but I don't like to have these things go much over an hour anyhow. So just so they're sort of digestible. Also, we're not restreaming on the YouTubes right now, just FYI. So, recap of the session. Let's pull up the map. I might move this around a little bit. You know, before we even pull up the map. So, here, I told the guys I wanted to get together, like, you know, I want to make sure everybody was there right at 7. I wanted to start right at 7. We had a lot to tackle, and they were all prompted on time, which I appreciated, and there was a minimum of, like, BS and ketchup, which sounds like a really horrible lunch special, but, like, that's, you know, we're all familiar. It's a social game. That's what happens. You sit down on the table and you talk about, you know, whatever sports were that weekend or whatever movies are coming up or something that happened in your day. And the next thing you know, like 45 minutes have gone by and you haven't started playing. I'm not opposed to that, but at Adventurers League, when we have a hard out, it's like, let's sit down, let's get to business, and let's get on with it. Which we did. That was nice. So I hand-waved them off of the previous session. They had driven away the fire giants, but they had information that the fire giants were planning to reorganize and return, and that was essentially like they took a long rest, and that was where we left off, right? I've talked about this previously, but there's always a danger in going, what do you guys do next? So I did not do that, right? Like, we could have... I wanted to retain control of the narrative at that point, right? So I said, all right, here's what happens. You know, in a few hours, you know, in 6 to 8 hours, Darathra has 50 guys that she's rallied, and she's put together, you know, a militia force to kind of put the fires out, regain control of the village, etc., 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 have a defensible force against, and if they come back right away. Then, by noon the next day, she has rallied a force of 300 riders, a lot of them from Yartar, who are rip-roaring ready to go to take out these fire giants. And I presented it to the party that, you know, basically it doesn't make sense for them to kind of... Well, I talked about this last time in the prep session, where it doesn't make sense for them to hunker down and wait for the giants to come back. So I just described, okay, over the course of the next 3 days, several things happened. They've tracked the fire giants. The fire giants have sort of been cornered in this inside of this old orcish lair in this big bluff hillside in the Subran Hills. And the good news is they've been cornered in there. The bad news is these 3 noble brothers from Neverwinter have, you know, were in the area and basically headed up a strike force and decided that this was their moment to prove themselves and their prowess. And they went off like idiots and attacked the fire giants and their forces, and they got captured. And so now the fire giants are holding them hostage, and they have kind of like a chip in play. So rather than being able to like push in a concerted, unified front and make an attack against the fire giants, and, you know, it might be deadly and it might cost some lives, but at least you'd have these 300, you know, this force of 300 to go after those guys. Now the fire giants have some innocent lives that they are holding hostage, that they can't, you know, that you have to factor into the mix. That was essentially the scenario that I had prepped. We talked about it on Tuesday. I did talk about how Aldrin Deravos, who's the father of these 3 brothers. So for those of you, just to catch you up, one of the NPCs has this quest that talks about these Darvos brothers and how they go off into the around into the hills around Noanar's Hold, and they start quote unquote hunting hill giants. But what they're actually doing is dueling in the woods, and basically whoever survives the series of duels slays his other brothers and gets his inheritance. It's a fairly twisted kind of thing. Well, since the NPC who gives out that quest passed away, I just wholesale appropriated those names. Why not? Why make up a whole new set of brothers? Let's pull people from the real world and use them. So I magically reincarnated their father or resurrected their father. He's still alive. The inheritance thing went out the window, but the three brothers were the ones who were captured. They're headstrong. They're a little overconfident and stupid, right? Like all nobles. So they got the skinny on that. Aldrin shows up and he starts handing out, like, making noise about, well, we can't sit here and have a siege. We need to go and get those guys and get them out. Like, and he starts basically kind of, he issues a bounty, and he tells the, whoever will listen in the militia, like, here's the deal. I've got 600 gold pieces per brother. If you can get them out successfully alive, I will pay you a bounty of 600 gold pieces for successfully rescuing my kid. It's like, that's 1,800 gold pieces that's on the line. And Darathra is like, technically I am the leader of this group and they will listen to me, but they're not going to listen to me for long. When he starts throwing money like that around, that's a significant, and it's only going to go up as we go on. So I put them in the situation where they met an NPC who was like a local shepherd and talked about, well, up on the backside of this mountain, there's this weird spring that has kind of a funny smell to it, and any animals that drink out of it they end up getting sick, and every once in a while there's this troll, this giant-sized troll that comes down off the mountain called Old Daggerback, and apparently he has daggers growing out of his spine and big shards of bone, and we can't ever figure out where he lives. He only comes around like every year and a half, every 2 years. About the time people forget that maybe he's up there, he shows up and snatches somebody. But anybody who's seen him has either been a liar or they've been killed. Like, nobody's actually ever seen this guy. But there's been tracks, and they all lead back to the spring, and we don't see a cave around there or anything, so we think he must live in that pond, and there's a possibility that pond may connect to the caves. Now, I'll maybe get into this in the challenges and tips, but this premise was a little bit thin. They were like, well, we could go up to this pond and kill this troll, but I don't see how that helps us. And he's like, well, I'm not saying for sure it could be a back door, but the spring either feeds into or is fed by something deeper within the hills, so if you can get in there and follow it, it might take you someplace. So this is one of those instances where I'm maybe pushing a little hard to, like, all right, guys, here's the hook. Like, let's just go. Like, I don't have a whole lot of time to get you to think through it and justify it. I need you to do the deal. But they, without too much, so, at that point then, like, 8 potions of water breathing show up, and Darathra is like, I don't care whether it actually does lead there or not. Like, if it does, great, but we're doing a hostage swap for one of the brothers and a couple other guys in 2 hours. And that's going to draw off a certain portion of the fire giant forces. So that means if you can get in there and get those guys while we're dealing with them, then you have a better chance of success rather than facing the full fire giant force if it does lead there. So, and if it doesn't, then just do it as a scouting mission and we'll figure something else out. But it's a long shot. You're kind of my strike force delta. Go in there, do what you can, and if you can get them out, great. If you can't, then we'll have learned something. But I don't have a whole lot of use for you guys. I've got 300 kind of restless militiamen standing around, and one very rich dude who's swinging his position and influence around, and I need you to do this, do this job for me. So they took the hook. They went up there. They spent some time investigating the pond and whatnot. That was fine. I used that as an opportunity. Like, they were very concerned, like, oh, anybody who who drinks this water gets like sick and whatnot. And I had kind of thrown that out there as sort of a foreshadowing that there was something kind of malignant living in the water, but it kind of backfired on me, and they got a little gun shy about like, well, we don't, what are we going to do if we get poisoned, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, all right, fine. So as they explored the pond, I used this opportunity, like, well, you find some frogs, you find some turtles, you see some raccoon prints, like, there's reeds growing around the edge of the pond. So it's clearly not as odious as it might initially appear to be, right? And so this pond is not on the map. It's not something that, like, we just did theater of the mind kind of thing. And what I needed to anticipate was I wanted to kind of put them under the gun of, you're going to spend enough time traveling through the water that when you emerge into the cave system, in this left-hand side here, when you emerge into that, you're probably not going to be able to swim back using your water breathing. So I wanted to put them in that, kind of in that heightened sense of like, well, now we're really kind of like, we're committed to this. So that's fine. That worked out. So they were trying to decide, do we swim in there? Do we take off our armor? Blah, blah, blah. Now, I had the two NPCs go along. I had Gelrin, Fohammer, go along. They had met with him before. And I had Urgula Meltimer go along. And she's got that giant slaying trait, which ended up proving itself to be very useful. So that worked out fine. I was able to use Gelrin as sort of a clue bat to kind of goad them into like, why would you take your armor off? Just swim like a real dwarf, So it was nice to have them along. What are you, a bunch of amateurs? Well, we've never done that before. Isn't that the very definition of what an amateur is? Well, yeah. So that was helpful to have to include those two NPCs. They swam through the cave system. I gave them basically sort of a narrative description of, you encounter some fish and you encounter da-da-da-da-da. You swim, give me all survival check to see if you can navigate the cave system, and you swim 150 feet down a dead end, and then you come back a different way, and back and forth, until finally they emerge in the tar wallow. I'm trying to think of the best way to do this. Let me pull this down a little bit so that it's not quite so on top of me. I want to pull up the map is what I'm getting at here. Oh boy, it's a lot of layers. There's a lot of stuff that I need to... Alright, let's see how this looks. That looks terrible. Oh, wait, though. Oh, it's not even the prep show, guys. I screwed that one up, too. Alright, so I'm going to float a little bit behind this thing, but that's fine. There's maybe an easy way to fix this. Wee-hee. Wee-hee. Oh, boy. Steady. Easy. Steady. Where's my biz card? Look at that. Is that a little better? It's a little better. I should have prepped this a little better than I did. I apologize. Getting fancy with this stuff. I don't even know what I just moved. All right. There we go. All right. I feel happy about that. So, so they pop up in the left here, and I had explained how this thing was like a troll of enormous size, etc. that you know it was an unusual specimen, but nobody had actually seen it, etc., etc., etc. But I had set the stage that it was essentially like a giant-sized troll. And one of the reasons that I did that was because that is the miniature that I had. Let me, I should have uploaded the photos, but let me just go pull the minis that I actually got out. It's a lot of running around today on Disorganized Play. Why do they call it Disorganized Play? Well, we're living up to the name today. So, this is the miniature that I actually ended up using. If you look on my Twitter feed, you will see photos of this thing. It's a Todd McFarlane Spawn miniature. It's not really a miniature; it's an action figure, right? And it came with some woman some female figure who has this thing on a chain, like it's its pet. But it's such a great mini. It's got a beautiful scale to it. Takes up a lot of room on the battle mat. But you put it down and everybody just sort of freaks out at what's this weird demon creature that's been dropped on the map. Like, it really makes an impression of it's strong, it's vile, it's huge, it's bestial, it's going to eat us. And it was cheap, you know. It was like, I don't know, $8 or $12. I want to say I got it at a comic shop in their like clearance bin. And it was $8 or something like that. It was definitely less than 20. And for something that's this scale, that's painted, that's articulated, that has this level of detail, that was a great bargain for me, right? I got a million dragons. I love the Todd McFarlane dragons, but you can't. A dragon has to make a very specific appearance in a game. This thing can stand in for all manner of giant, nasty creature. So, something to consider there. So when they come up out of the water, and I had everybody make a stealth check, and almost everybody made it. They cast Pass Without Trace. They cast Pass Without Trace before they went in the water, I believe. So they had +10 on all of their stealth checks. Well, unfortunately, one of the NPCs rolled a 2. She got a 12, and this thing snuffed them out. So then it was just roll for initiative straight up, and let's go to town. The encounter, even though it was described as a troll and it looks like a giant troll, I actually used this session to use a bunch of monsters from Volo's Guide. So I used a Catoblepas. It has such a weird name, but it's such an iconic D&D creature, although I've honestly never used one in a game before. And it rolled really crappy for an initiative. They pounded on it. I did know that was for a group of 8 players. It was kind of a light challenge, so I boosted the hit points. And, you know, at the end, all the way at the end, like all 8 characters got to go, and then all the way at the end, it got to use its death gaze on somebody, and that was not what they were expecting. They were expecting this thing to make like some sort of troll attack where, you know, claw, bite, or whatever, and then regenerate some hit points. And instead, it turns and it looks at the bard, and its like eyes light up with necrotic energy, and the bard's like, "Arr!" And fortunately, the dude made a saving throw, because I don't think he could have taken 64 points of necrotic damage in a single swipe. So that was a cool encounter. They defeated it in 2 rounds. They did spend quite a bit of resources because they were kind of concerned that this thing was going to eat them. Rightly so. I think that was a combination of foreshadowing and having the miniature on the table. So that worked out. They looted the room. I used this as an opportunity. So in the earlier quest, in their earlier exploration of Triboar, it says if they can figure out that the woman who runs the broken windows or whatever that weird inn was that they spent so much time, if they can figure out that she murdered her husband, then the guy's relatives pay them back with a +1 longbow. Well, we've long since sort of passed. That was literally like a month ago. But I'm like, let's reintroduce this thing. So they got a +1 longbow out of it. So they went through the pile of stuff. I didn't really give out any gold, but I'm like, you see this piece of nicely worked wood stuffed in this weird matted nest that's down at the south end of the map here. And they're like, well, let's search it. So they searched it, and sure enough, like, it came up with this longbow. There was a discussion about, well, who really wants, who can even use a +1 longbow. That was that's a whole different topic of, you know, basically the party has what I would generously term as a junk magic item. They consider it a junk magic. They're like, well, I don't really want it. Do you want it? I don't know. We've talked about that before too, but it's definitely, it's anticlimactic as the DM to include a piece of treasure that then nobody really wants. So it's you're stuck between two alternatives. One is I'm going to include what's written, and they can figure out what they want to do with it and adjust their character accordingly. Or you could, because it's a non-certed item, I guess I could have said, well, it's a +1 crossbow, but then it feels like you're playing favorites to whatever characters in the group. So, especially because it's an AL game, if it was my home game, I'd be like, yeah, it's a +1 crossbow, and the ranger can have it, and, like, you know, I would look at what the party balance of treasure is. In AL, I feel like my hands are a little more tied on this sort of stuff. So then they clear away some of these rocks, or actually like clamber over some of these rocks that are to the northeast, and they start going down this passage. I describe this passage as being very steep and twisting and winding, so they can tell that they're changing elevation. So they were up on the top of the thing, and this path, you know, goes down at almost a 45-degree angle. Not so much that you feel like you have to climb it, but it is so much that it's like difficult terrain. You're like pushing on the sides of the cave and kind of like sliding down, da 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 da. I'm going to take a 30-second break here. I clearly need some water. It's kind of dry in here, so I'll be right back. Look, that wasn't so bad, was it? Was it the calendar that I accidentally moved? I think it was, wasn't it? Yeah, I accidentally moved the calendar. There we go. So much better. So, they go down these twisting passageways. When they got to... Oh, I'm moving the calendar again. When they got to... When they got to this center section here, I described how there were stalactites and stalagmites, and there was kind of a strange orange water that was dripping from the ceiling, etc., etc. And basically what I decided is that it was acetic, very acetic water that was dripping from the ceiling. Essentially, like there was drops of acid coming down, you know, just sort of raining through this area. So I'm like, give me a DC 15 dexterity save to like cross through and not, you know, and take less damage. So I did that. It was a very simple challenge. They did 2D, you know, it did 2d10 to them. If they made it, if they failed it, they took 7, and if they made it, they took 3. It was really no big deal, but it was a nice way to kind of paint the environment and kind of like edge off their hit points and include like, okay, this is why this back door is so hazardous and awful, right? They work their way around here, and then they come to this room that has a 5-foot drop down into the next passageway, and the next passageway looks like the wall has collapsed, and I described that maybe the wall has collapsed because of the effect of the acid flowing through the stone up above. But at any rate, it's caved in, you know, with loose rock and debris. So basically they made some athletics checks to move this stuff into this larger chamber up above and excavate out down into this next area. And those checks were basically, how long does it take you to do this? So by the time they had come to this ridge up here, this ledge up top that overlooked this larger cavern, it was essentially 2 hours later. We had burned enough time at that point. I'm like, between the 45 minutes for swimming and then about another 45 minutes to go down and then another 15 to 20 minutes to excavate this area down here, you've burned your time allotment. Like, whatever's going on is going on. So you're up on this ridge and you can see down into the cavern below. So they arrayed themselves up here and quickly made a plan, and they saw there was a bunch of orcs just sort of hanging around. I think I put about 8, maybe 10 orcs in here. Regular orcs, not orogs. And they could see that in the northeast corner up here in this pit, that was where the prisoners were. They had all been kind of loaded into this pit, and the pit had some like green slimy stuff in it, and they all looked like they'd been fairly badly abused and not well fed, and just, what are they going to do about it? There's one orc there standing guard, etc. We got in, they sprung their surprise attack. Again, they had, maybe this was the point at which they had passed without trace, so they really, like, they got a surprise round on everybody, and they lit up those orcs pretty well. Although I was surprised that even with one round of attacks, they couldn't take all of them out. So, of course, some of the orcs sounded the alarm, and the reinforcements arrived, right? Specifically, from this final area back here where clearly the 2 fire giants are lairing, one of them showed up and came out and started threatening the prisoners in the pit, right? So they saw the fire giant came out. They started focus firing on the fire giant in round 2. The fire giant said something like, he just like bellowed, "Tararuk, release the beast!" And, he heard this voice like, "Now, my lord? Yes, now!" And then they saw another giant-type creature from this area that we have now to the northeast. This is sort of a stepped pit that goes down about 15, 25 feet. And there were a couple of stakes that were pounded into the ground that had like manacles on them or whatever. And so they let this thing use. This was a mouth of Grolantor. So I had roughly 8 orcs, I had a fire giant, and I had a mouth of Grolantor. And they released the prisoners and got some of them to kind of run up into this passageway that leads past the mouth of the Grolantor and past the fire giant dwelling. This thing in the center to the south is an oil pit, and in the briefing I had described how the fire giants were somehow had come upon a bunch of tar. So this was a tar pit, and they were using it to swab all of the entranceways into this old orc lair, and they were going to have the magmen set it on fire in case they had made a in case there was some sort of assault that was going to be mounted against them in the lair. They just have the magmen light all of that tar on fire, and then that smoke would come out, and it would smoke out any attacking forces, but it would also probably smoke out the hostages. So that was sort of their defensive mechanism. Well, I want to make sure that was included on the map here. So there's this area here on the map where that's a tar pit, and I had footsteps coming out, but I didn't want to muck up the map with it on this particular version. So there's footprints that came out and went to the east. So at any rate, the mouth of Grolantor comes out from below, turns the corner, sees all of these potential, basically sees all fresh meat, and the great thing about the mouth of Grolantor is you roll randomly to see what it decides to do. Well, it makes an attack against everybody within 10 feet and flattens 5 of the 8 hostages that were left. Wham, 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 just destroys them. So that put some fear into the party and created some urgency. So really we got into kind of a fight here where I don't remember. The bard cast some sort of spell. I don't. It was Tasha's Hideous Laughter. So the bard cast Tasha's Hideous Laughter on the fire giant, and then they were trying to make their way to rescue as many prisoners as they could. It got into a little bit of a cluster. One of the guys did some damage, and the fire giant ended up breaking out of the Tasha's Hideous Laughter and getting a few licks in before they focused fired on him and knocked him out. So the fire giant got killed. And then they made fairly short work of the mouth of Grolanator. So that's our recap of what the session was. They had, it took the full 3.5 hours to play all this out. They freed the hostages. Congratulations, you've earned enough XP to go on to the next level. That's the end of Chapter 6. Blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, it did accomplish what I set out to do, which was, one, I wanted to end this chapter on a high note. I wanted the party to score a definitive victory, and they did that. They felt that they had earned their victory in the combat here. They stretched their resources. They got to do some cool and heroic things. Essentially, they also got to fight some really badass monsters. So they felt good. Like they got points in the book, right? The other thing that I wanted to do is I wanted to have a battle map combat that was very grid focused. You move X number of squares, ... Because we had been doing this kind of in between type of combat that was more of a that was more of a hybrid of Theater of the Mind and Grid, where I was using these range bands, which I thought worked well. But it was time to go back onto the battle mat and do some moving our minis around, do some tactical combat. And they seem to enjoy that too. So those are the two big things. And then finally just like give them a reason to like wrap up Chapter 3 and put a... It felt like this is a conclusion to a chapter. Wrap up Chapter 2 to be clear. So once again, if you want the map that I drew, it's in our Dropbox folder. I think I can put a link to that right in here. Let me just pull it up quick, and I'll drop it in the chat for you guys. I believe it's this one. Yes, it is. All right, share, get a link, copy link. The map is... Oh, that's the whole folder, right? So any of the materials that I've created for Disorganized Play that are not Patreon only are in this thing. Challenges and tips, I would say, for running this particular scenario. I felt like the opening premise was not fully fleshed out and was not something that they could easily hook onto. So they didn't really see, like, well, how does this help the hostage situation? I don't get what, so that could have been cleaner, it could have been clearer. I felt like I also foreshadowed the poison too much, and it became an inhibitor toward choosing the path that I had prepared. So be careful when you say it's dangerous. The players may take you at your word. So those were the main challenges. I felt like the combat went well. I thought the little hazard traps were annoying enough to paint the scene and convey a sense of danger to the party, but not annoying enough that they became time wasters or they became a blocking obstacle to them progressing forward and getting to the meat of the scenario, which was this big surprise, or attack from surprise, rescue the hostages type of thing. So that all worked out well. I don't think there are any other real challenges for me running this scenario. I screwed up on making the initial hook clear enough and strong enough, and I screwed up on foreshadowing that the poison. But everything else worked fairly well. I will say that using monsters from Volo's Guide also worked very well. I mean, honestly, I did reskin the Catapulipos to fit this weird miniature thing that I happened to have on hand because I knew I wanted to use it. But that's okay. I think, they were like, what is this thing? Why is it doing that? They were very surprised by both the initial Catapulipos encounter and the eventual appearance of the Mouth of Gorlantor, the weird hill giant guy. So I incorporated some new monsters from Volo's Guide, and I felt like that was a strong asset to have in my quiver. I actually had one other monster kind of in my hip pocket, but we were running short on time, and the challenge was already kind of fierce enough that I didn't need to throw in another extra monster on it. So, another a tip would be to look for a different source for monsters or reskin your monsters to kind of change things up in this particular scenario, and also I think what was I going to say about that? It was a nice surprise for them to not, I've got some very experienced players at my table, right? And they know like what is this thing, they have a good idea of what all of this stuff is. So to be able to use Volo's Guide to switch things up, even without reskinning, was a pleasant surprise for me and for them. So those are my challenges and tips. It took about three and a half hours to play. It was a fun scenario. So looking ahead to Chapter 3, if you are a Patreon backer, you know that in our folder here of special Patreon stuff, we have a list of our quest lines. So we have a list of our quest lines. That I think is available to everybody. Maybe it is just our Patreon backers, but also we have a list of let me just turn this off. Unnecessary. We have a list of side quest locations that are coming out of Tribal War. So I am planning to take a look for my next session. Which quests am I going to send them on, and which ones are mandatory, etc. So I want to get an idea. So if we take a look at Chapter 3, just the basic structure of Chapter 3, what is the function here, really? So the basic overview of Chapter 3 is you have an array of side quests coming out of Chapter 2 that are handed to you by various surviving NPCs. You have 2 to 3 mandatory encounters that are included to help you kind of goose the story along. And then at the end of Chapter 3, you meet Harshnag and move on to tackling events in Chapter 4, right? To me, the purpose of Chapter 3, this is the part where you really kind of have to sit back and reflect. So narratively, what is the function of this? Both narratively and mechanically. And I think mechanically, the function of Chapter 3 is to hand out some rewards and some goodies to the players for not getting a lot of rewards and goodies in Chapter 2. Because there's not a lot of treasure in this thing, in Chapter 2, unless you do the side quests. But then the side quests are handed out in Chapter 2, but expected to be fulfilled in Chapter 3. That's the mechanical implication here. Get the party kind of up to speed with some equipment so that they're ready to deal with what's coming up in Chapter 4. Narratively, I think the role of Chapter 3 is to foreshadow that while the incident, the 2 incidents that the party has previously encountered, that being Nightstone and then the assault on whatever town that they took place in, that those incidents aren't actually just sort of isolated standalone type of things. That there appears to be a wave of these incidents kind of washing over the Sword Coast, and it's all related to giants and something going on with the giants. And that's when Harshnag kind of at the end of the chapter shows up and kind of gives away the goodies of like, oh, well, here's what's actually causing some of this, right? So that's the functional mechanic. There's a lot of overland travel. You have to be prepared for that. All right, fine. But it's a little bit, I would say the chapter's a little bit loose plot-wise, right? So that's the thing about chapter 3. What I want to do is I want to try and find a way to compress this thing and really keep it tight and not become ponderous, and I know that the players sort of feel like, well, we're kind of out of plot threads right now. I'm not sure what we're supposed to do next, because it's not clear what they're supposed to do next. So we'll talk about this more on Tuesday, but my task either between sessions here or at the start of the next session is to hand out those quests, maybe reconnect them with Jorgen, or the only thing that they really have kind of going for them is moving to going to Citadel Felbar, but they feel like that's a long ways away. That's going to be a long trip. I may end up kind of like goosing them in that direction, because or at least using their, I may end up using their motivation to move there to flow some side quests into that direction and reinforce that motivation. So that's what we're looking at with Chapter 3. I'm going to talk about more than that on Tuesday, but Chapter 3, in my mind, is a little bit kind of like road montage type of material. It's not strong location exploring. It's not heavy RP. It's not deep investigation that reveals a whole bunch of, important facts. So James V makes this suggestion that maybe a flying castle could come by and pick them up. Yeah, it would be more appropriate now than it would have been in Chapter 2. Honestly, I think it might be a fun encounter where you see that flying castle, why don't you try and chase it down? That could be, I'm not opposed to having that flying castle. I'm more opposed to kind of the kooky cloud giant who just conveniently shows up and goes, "I like you little people." That's the part that strained believability for me, or at least did not fit in the game as I was running it with my party. So those are some of the things that I'm considering. Is that I think I figure I've got about 3 months left on this adventure, so that ends up being 12 sessions. We're at what amounts to the halfway point. I need to kick the plot into gear because there are some much larger locations that we're going to be exploring and taking care of later on. You got to figure those last couple of chapters are going to take a good 6 sessions. That means I've got 6 sessions between here and now, or maybe 7 sessions to get them to the point where they can start exploring those closing chapters. So my assumption is that this is going to probably wrap up sometime in the end of March, which makes sense. It launched in September. That's 6 to 7 months. That seems like that's about the right amount of time, although officially we haven't heard anything in terms of when the next adventure is going to be released. So, it's a little bit throwing a dartboard at the wall at this point. But that's what I'm thinking, I'm thinking, looking at the tea leaves here, how much longer, it's better for me to plan on there being 12 sessions, and then it turns out that there's 14 or 16, than it is for me to plan on there being 14 or 16 sessions, and it turns out there's only 12. So, those are the factors that I'm considering looking ahead in Chapter 3. If you have Q&A, if you have things that you want me to tackle, either like a player's question, I don't usually do rules questions. But if you have a problem in your game or with DMing or whatever, you can go ahead and drop those in the chat now. I'll address those things. Other than that, while I'm waiting for you guys to catch up to the live stream here, I do want to say that I used a lot of miniatures for this particular combat, and one of the players had done a poll off of the current season and gotten the this is always so weird because it's backwards, had gotten the Fire Giant mini, and so we were able to drop that on the table, and that really made a nice impression on the table. I also had a bunch of old D&D miniatures that I used for the prisoners. That worked out well. And then from one of the old DDM packs, I had an actual Hill Giant mini that I used for the Mouth of Gurlantor, even though the Mouth of the Gurlantor is much more distorted and weird. He's not so buff and filled out and whatnot. It was nice to put him on the table and use him. So, you know, if you can find a way to, and it really enhances the tactical combat experience to have not necessarily exact miniatures, right? So I don't. The question is which set of minis is this from? This miniature is a Hill Giant Barbarian, copyright 2005, Wizards of the Coast. So I don't know which DDM that this is from. I'm not sure, but it's the Hill Giant Barbarian. It makes a nice, just big beefy fighter guy. It really. I think I got some of these as like a promo or something at Gen Con where they're just handing them out, and it turns out that they're kind of rare. So this is like I don't know, it's like an $8 miniature on eBay or whatever. Too bad I got one for free. It pays to, you know, shell out your $2,000 to go to Indianapolis once a year. So. I like that miniature. I'm curious. I would like to beef out some more of my miniatures. I've got some Reaper Bones coming, but I never seem to find time to paint them. But I will go back to, as a DM tip, like, if you can find the right McFarlane Spawn stuff, some of it is a little too high tech and doesn't quite work out. But he has some really interesting demon creatures, and if you can get a deal on them, either on eBay or sometimes you can find, you know, just back stock on Amazon that they've decided to mark down. Storage becomes an issue, but it's a very convenient way to make an impression on your table that is outside the norm of what they get. I guess, you know, with lacking any other questions in the chat today, I want to talk briefly about the role of dragon miniatures, because I am looking across at my my mini action figure shelf, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 dragon miniatures sitting on the shelf right now, and each one is different. So those are 6 unique different things. One is a water dragon. One's a dragon that's in flight. One's a 2-headed dragon. That's pretty cool. One of them is the old D&D toy set, a bronze dragon. So those are fun, and each of them has their own kind of like place and personality. But I want to emphasize that each one of them has their own place and personality, right? If you start dropping dragon encounters into your game, kind of like willy-nilly left and right, they really lose their potency. They lose the impact. There are times, there are creatures who are iconic to D&D that it's going to be a point of pride for the players to have defeated this creature. I will say, they don't really know what this was, but it's going to be a point of pride for them to say, we defeated Old Daggerback. And I may have to come up with some sort of in-game either title or reward for them having done that, right? Similarly, it should be the same type of situation with dragons. There's such a thing as having too many dragon miniatures, because, and I guess I'm stealing some of this advice from Monty Cook, because I had sent him a link one time, I think it was on the forums or something like that, like, oh, hey, there's a really good deal over at this online store on this McFarlane dragon, and he's like, at some point, how many dragon encounters do you need to have, right? So unless you're running a game that's like, the Council of Worms has assembled, and they have decided to bring forth war upon the land, you don't need 15 dragons. You probably don't need 6. Use them in a way where it's judicious, it's important, they play a key role either in the story or the quest or the adventure. They slay this thing, and that's the unique moment of triumph for the party that they can look back on and take pride in. So, Farquaad, this link is still munged, where Bastard and Random is is blending together. At any rate, so that's my advice, is when you have something like a dragon, a Tarrasque, I would even say things that are like very high CR creatures, like a Pit Fiend, but mostly, but specifically because the game is called Dungeons and Dragons, my advice to you is go into a lot of dungeons, include a lot of dungeons, do not include a lot of dragons. It burns out the cliche, or it burns out the idea and it becomes cliche. And I think it makes the players less satisfied with their accomplishments. A hard-earned fight against a dragon, just because of the mythology and folklore surrounding dragons, that they are sort of this extra tough, extra smart, extra wily type of beast. They're even though we have monsters where you could say, well, a CR6 troll is a lot stronger than a CR5 dragon wormling, killing a troll just in the fantasy realm of our shared cultural imagination, killing a troll is far less of an accomplishment than killing a dragon, even if that dragon is the size of a war horse or whatever, right? So that's my little extra special tip for you today. Make sure that you know when a special monster is special, and make it special rather than just going, oh, you know what, this could kind of like fit into my XP budget, why don't I just include this? So, not all monsters are created equal when it comes to the weight that they carry in our cultural imagination. All right, so that's noon. That's the recap show, everybody. I will be back on. Well, first of all, let's take a look at what's coming up the rest of the week. Tonight, Call of Cthulhu Black Bag is back. More weird time travel adventures with Mr. Wes Otis and his fine crew. Tomorrow, Stephen Pope has Masks, powered by the Apocalypse. That's our sort of our Teen Titan-ish style game. If you like teen comic book heroes, that will be for you. And James V, you make a very good point here that a Beholder or a Mind Flayer likewise should be a singular encounter. And I feel like sometimes published adventures break that rule. If you played Out of the Abyss, you may have just sort of randomly come across a beholder during the course of your adventures. I want a beholder to be a mastermind or a set piece encounter. I want that thing to have an outsized type of weight and imprint in the environment around the dungeon and the creatures who live in that area. It needs to be dominating those things, or they all need to be scared of it. Or, the players rarely should be surprised by necessarily a beholder, right? They should have an idea like, oh boy, you want to kind of foreshadow like, oh, things are getting bad for you. Now, a mind flayer you can surprise on them. I think that's within the rules, but I think at least for a group of new players, or that includes some new players, unwrap that sense of mystery that comes with, all right, you see this strange creature with these 4 tentacles, and then half the guys at the table go, and half the guys at the table are like, what's going on? It's like, well, we need to run. So that's give those characters their due. Give those creatures their due. Just like you wouldn't have a random archmage just show up and for the party to defeat so that they can loot the body and steal a staff of power or whatever. Like, you want to develop that character a little bit and give them their unique place within the world, and give them their unique footprint that they've carved out in the world. Can you carve out a footprint? Yes, you can. I believe in you. All right, so just to look back at our calendar, 5 o'clock on Saturday, Phoenix Dawn Command with Mr. Sack's car. Sunday, you can spend the day getting ready for the finale of Monday Night Dungeon Fight. That's right, Mr. James V, who's in our chat right now, is going to be there competing on Monday night. Tracy King is going to be there. Adam Vittel is going to be there. Unfortunately, this is going to come to sad news for some of you. Ms. Amy Vorpal has a filming commitment that she cannot get out of that shoots on Monday nights, so she will not be there to defend her title. That means, by default, our second place runner-up in that bracket, Mr. Eric Reichert, will be finally assuming the mantle of Heroic Champion and taking on the other 3 players in our season finale of Monday Night Dungeon Fight. So tune in for that on Monday. I will be back here on Tuesday at 2 o'clock, barring any real-world interventions, and doing our prep session for Session 12 of Storm King's Thunder. So, thank you so much to everyone who supports us on Patreon, who spreads the word, whatnot. I want to thank Flockwad for being our moderator. As always, I don't always remember to give a shout out to all of our dedicated mods like FQ and Braid and so forth, and those people who have really become pillars of our community here. We absolutely appreciate all of the time and energy that you take out of your lives to help contribute and make this channel free from internet assholery. I just said it, yes. Also, we have a questionnaire coming. You just saw it scroll by in D20 Robot. Actually, we have a questionnaire running. It ends tomorrow, so if you have not taken it, it's about 5 pages or something like that, and I don't mean 5 pages like, oh my god, it's 5 pages. It's like a few questions over 5 pages. Helps us decide what we can do to reshape, refine, reinvigorate the channel for 2017, offer you shows that you are jazzed about. Hopefully you're jazzed about the shows that we've got. But the great thing about live streaming and what we've been embracing here with Saving Throw Show is that it's an experiment, right? And things are always changing. New ideas are coming in, going out, flying in. We can try things on kind of like a seasonal basis, look at rearranging our schedule. We have new people come in, old people kind of move to different projects, take on different things. I started as a player in Barkey's Brigade. I took on my own show with Monday Night Dungeon Fight. Now I'm streaming Prep. So we have a lot of opportunities in this space to get very experimental and do things new and different and engaging. And we want to make sure that you fill out that questionnaire and help us decide what's actually engaging. So thank you to all of our backers and supporters. I want to thank everybody who joined me today. I know this was last minute, and it's sometimes hard to get the word out when we go off of the schedule. But thanks so much for listening, and to all of you guys who are watching back on YouTube, thank you so much for tuning in. Until next time, let's dungeon! I did it right! I did it right!